You ever hear the old adage, win on Sunday, sell on Monday? That doesn't exist the same way it did before. If it did, the top 3 brands out there would be associated. Okay, that one checks out. X-Ray, a little bit more obscure and less used, and the subject of this video, Yokomo. Out of all the people I've raced and all the races I've been to, I've seen a grand total of 2 people run Yokomo. Now I'm sure in other places they may or may not be popular, but for me they're nearly non-existent. This lack of exposure kind of led me to being very intrigued by the brand as a whole, despite the talking down of it. I heard for a while that they're basically a copy of Team Associated and vice versa almost all the time. Keep this in mind for later. I've seen them win sometimes at the big leagues like the IFMAR Worlds back in 2017 and placed highly otherwise in other races. This is the main reason why I ended up buying the YZ4-SF2. I wanted a new 4-wheel drive, and I wanted something that had a reputation of being well built. Did it live up to that? Let's find out. This build was very polarizing for me. On one hand, the build seems to be set up for people who are at least competent in building kits. But on the other hand, the build seems to be set up for beginners coming with things that an ordinary Joe, like me, may or may not have, like a ball carp wrench. It's a bit weird looking, but it's there. Not to mention that the kit did not come with wheels in a normally $550 kit, nor did the body seem very strong. Now I know that they're supposed to be lightweight, but I've never been a huge fan of lightweight bodies. They get broken up far too easily. Oh, and the car had no fan mount. As for the instructions on the actual manual, I'm not entirely a fan compared to what I'm used to. The instructions are, for lack of a better term, a bit cluttered. There's a lot going on here, and honestly, when I first opened up the manual to get started, I was a tad bit overwhelmed. Most because both English and Japanese are used in the instructions. But it was too late now. I had opened the seal on the box, and I was ready and set up to build the car. And I can't tell you how happy I am that I braved the informative but cluttered manual. This was by far one of the best feeling kits I've ever put together. Everything fits together quite nicely, and there are little things that make me feel like this thing was well thought out in its design. Take for example how this pill block sort of molds into the chassis. That's nothing, however, compared to this. The number one thing I hate building on a kit more than anything are the turnbuckles and suspension links. This is especially a problem for me on the Losi, as the ball cups themselves didn't have any holes to put a driver through. Another thing that is a bit of an issue for me specifically is the fact that I don't have a micrometer. This makes setting up my geometry out of the box for, say, that Losi or a Team Associated quite difficult without a setup board. This isn't as much of an issue here as the illustrations are 1-to-1 in terms of length. This means that you can match up the length of your links exactly to the lengths of on the illustrations and get at least very close to what they're supposed to be. Another thing I liked about the build was a lack of excess in bags. There's no going to one bag, then going to another for a specific part that you need, then going back to the same bag. Everything is there in the bag and easy enough for you to follow if you have experience building a kit. If you don't, however, the cluttered-ish instructions can lead you astray if you're not paying attention. Overall though, the build was very nice and I really liked how it went together. Driving time. Now I didn't get any footage of this thing running on clay because I was not being very proactive at the time, so here's some footage of the 2-wheel drive mod race at Columbus instead. Also, to be honest, I didn't have that high expectations for this thing as it didn't come with a center diff. Which I find kind of odd as the kit comes with everything needed to set it up for either dirt or carpet right out of the box. However, for those really loose dirt tracks and ease of driving in general, you will need a center diff. This kind of showed itself more so on this clay track as the buggy was definitely very fast but not easy to drive. This can almost entirely be attributed to the lack of a center diff as a slipper clutch is used instead. This may work well for you if you happen to run an extremely well swept and high grip dirt track, but for most places, even on something like AstroTurf, you'll want a center diff. Overall, the buggy handled well and it had a lot of potential, but this was not the place for it to realize its potential out of the box. If you're going to buy this buggy and only run on dirt, be sure to invest in a center diff from Yokomo. Now let's take a look at another driving surface, AstroTurf. This is where this buggy really started to shine. Now it's important to note that the first thing that a lot of people do first when it comes to running 4-wheel drive buggies, especially on really high grip surfaces, is try to calm down their steering, and this buggy is no exception. I initially tried to run this with mezzo tires all the way around, and that was simply too much grip as this car wanted to roll way too badly with the stock carpet setup. Instead of changing the setup geometry and roll sensor of the car, which I still have yet to understand by the way, I simply replaced the tires with Schumacher cactuses all the way around. This helped calm the steering down and made the buggy much more forgiving to drive. With a bit of practice, as I hadn't driven a four-wheel drive buggy in a while, I was able to get around this track pretty well. Dare I say this is better to drive out of the box than the B7 But is it faster? The answer is simple. I don't really know. The fastest time a B7 4.1 had gotten around this track that I know of was 12.7 or 12.6. The fastest time I was able to get with the Yokomo was a 12.5. With that being said, I wanted to get a one-to-one race with somebody who was similar to me in skill, and I got that in two people. Gary Cole and Alex Ralph, running Schumacher and Team Associated respectively. I was able to qualify second ahead of Gary but was behind Alex. Then the main came up. Now you can probably tell where this is going, as I just segued into the durability section of this review-ish, but I'll continue anyway. We were pretty much a 3-carriage train for a few laps and it was pretty much a dead heat. Unfortunately, I managed to mess up on the drop down onto the loop and a few others crashed into my side, snapping an arm and taking me out of the race. Truth be told, I did not expect this to happen the way it did. I expected if it was going to break that it was going to happen at Columbus at that much larger clay track as speeds were higher, jumps were bigger, and wipeouts were much more dramatic. Not only that, but the Snap Hard race was the first time I drove a four-wheel drive buggy in a good few months, so I did crash. A lot. So why did the arms snap so easily? It doesn't seem like they were made in the same way that Losi Stifazell plastic is. I don't really know. Maybe it was the perfect angle and I just got unlucky? Perhaps it was the screw that went into the arm itself that had the lower shock eyelet when it was too long and weakened it? I can't really give a definitive answer. I'll be sure to post updates on this thing's durability in my discussion tab on the channel. All in all, I like this buggy a lot. Enough to keep it at least for a while. It's probably one of the best builds I've done, but it isn't perfect and isn't for everyone. As for whether or not I'd recommend it to a beginner, well, it's hard to say. Regardless of the build being easy or difficult to follow and the buggy itself being easy or difficult to drive, it's still a four-wheel drive buggy. It's not beginner friendly from the jump, so keep that in mind. Not to mention that part support is a bit on the sparse side in the US, so keep that in mind when you buy the buggy. Make sure you stock up on extra parts. I know I did. That's all for now. If you liked the video, be sure to hit that like button and comment what you thought of the video below. Also, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and check out my Patreon page if you want to get up-to-date updates on my next videos and submit video ideas. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, Lucas Tarka, RC World Discord server, and Casey Nix. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.